What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So continuing our discussions on All New, All Different Marvel, what I want to do here is pick up with All New, All Different The Vision Volume 3, technically speaking, if we're going chronologically. And of course, this is written by Tom King. Now, those of you guys who are coming out of DC Rebirth, Tom King will sound familiar because he is currently the guy who's writing Batman. One thing to keep in mind here is that when it comes to the world of comic books, some writers have exclusivity contracts. For example, Scott Snyder signed a contract with DC that he won't write for Marvel Comics, which is actually a pretty big deal because if Scott Snyder turned around and started writing Avengers, one, it would be amazing, and two, it would probably end up causing problems for DC in terms of the popularity of Batman. So keeping him on retainer benefits them. But guys like Tom King can get away with it. Now, whether or not he has clout or whether or not it's because he's just kind of allowed to is a question I don't have the answer to. But not everybody signs exclusivity contracts. That's one of the reasons why you see him writing for both Marvel and DC at the same time. But more so than that, Tom King does one hell of a job writing the Vision. And I'm gonna say this, Tom King's Batman is pretty stellar. And the reason why I love Tom King's writing so much is because he's really good at focusing on character. I know a lot of people coming out of Batman are thinking, well, I want Scott Snyder's run. Scott Snyder's run was so unique. Tom King has his own writing style and he's extremely good at what he does. In truth, I think Vision is where he stands out. I think Vision is really where he stands out as a writer. But what he does here is he basically draws on the aspect of Vision himself. Now, this comes out of All New, All Different Avengers. And for those of you guys who don't know, All New, All Different Avengers, that first issue kind of set the stage for everything that was going to be going on in the future of All New, All Different Marvel Comics with regards to the various members of the Avengers. Prior to Secret Wars, Vision was very close to Scarlet Witch. In fact, they were both married. Now, this led up to the events where Scarlet Witch kind of went crazy and she forced Vision to start killing or start attacking the Avengers by spawning versions of Ultron. All of that happened during the Avengers Disassembled storyline as a prelude to the House of M when the Scarlet Witch went crazy and warped reality. Because of that, Vision lost total control. He saw that, what she had done to him was basically a betrayal of trust, and so he lost total faith in her as a person and filed for divorce, and the two of them were basically over. But it doesn't change the fact that they were attempting to mend the rift between the two of them. They were trying to fix problems, and what this did is it picked up with that. But in light of everything that had happened, the Vision had basically walked away from what it meant to try to become human, and instead, he had effectively wiped his mind and wanted to essentially start over again. Now, this is really cool. I like what Tom King is doing with this because were it only, so easy for us as people to start over. We've all had those moments in our lives where we wish we could just wipe the slate clean, move to a different state, and just start all over again. Maybe because our lives aren't going a certain way, whatever the case may be, we just want to start fresh. Vision gives us, the chance to live through him vicariously and experience that. And so what happens is the Vision has effectively vacated his role, or I guess his position as a traditional Avengers member, shacked up with the new Avengers or the new Avengers team, but also formed a family of his own. Now, what Tom King does in this opening issue is he basically gives us the rundown on what's going on with the Vision. He says that the Vision has created a wife, that the Vision has created two children, Vivian and Vincent, although I think they're only really referred to as Vin and Viv, but in order for me to make life a little easier in this video, we're gonna call them Vivian and Vincent. But they basically moved, to the suburbs in DC, into Arlington, in an attempt to more or less live a normal life. And this is interesting because this is something that we've never seen before with Vision. With Vision, we've seen him wiped. Like for those of you guys who don't know, and actually Tom King touches on this in the story, the Vision was created by Ultron, and the Vision was created using the brainwaves of Wonder Man, Simon Williams, who, as far as I'm aware, we're actually, I think, gonna see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe coming up relatively soon, if the rumors are to be believed. So take that with a grain of salt. But the Vision had always operated as a tried and true superhero once he was, I guess, kind of rehabilitated by the Avengers team, so to speak, when he was basically reprogrammed, so to speak. And from that point going forward, up until Marvel wanted to revamp him and wiped him out in his entirety, he was, again, just a tried and true hero. Now, when he was revamped, his brainwaves were eliminated, he was all white, he didn't have the Simon Williams persona. This was later on fixed, and he went back to his normal self, but we'd never seen an instance where the Vision had effectively sat down and formed a family in the suburbs, tried and true. That was something that had never really been explored. And in Marvel Comics which prior to Secret Wars, Vision and Scarlet Witch did have kids, but it turned out that these were just constructs. These were just shards of Mephisto after he'd been destroyed or defeated, I believe, by Franklin Richards. And so the result was that they weren't really even real. In this instance, Vision has basically severed all ties with the Scarlet Witch, and he has artificially created a family of his own. More so than that, he has neighbors. And again, this is really just Tom King touching on the archetypical suburban life. You know, that the Visions move in, the neighbors are curious who they are, a couple of the neighbors show up, they bring cookies, which the wife thinks is a really, a great way to kind of introduce themselves. The husband thinks it doesn't make any sense because they're robots and robots don't eat food. And so it's really just kind of this dichotomy between the Vision as he was and the Vision as to who he's trying to be. But something that I also hope you're noticing here by virtue of us going through this story is the Vision is very much trying to be human. And this is the crux of this story. This is really the core, this is the basis that Tom King is shooting for. The Vision trying to be human and watching it all simply fall apart. Now, it doesn't fall apart because of Vision himself. It actually falls apart because of another factor, which I'm really excited to get to because the story is written so well. But the other kind of cool thing here is that because of the fact that Vision isn't human, because he is an android, because his wife is an android, his children are androids, they don't relate to each other in normal ways. A really good example of this is after the neighbors leave and they throw away the cookies, they begin to have this discussion. The wife says they seem nice, and they begin to have this debate back and forth on what it means when you say a person seems nice. Vision goes as far as to say that they should have been referred to as, they seem kind, in the sense that saying they seem nice has a different connotation to it, which doesn't fit the situation. This isn't a really big deal, this isn't huge, but it goes towards the idea that despite his best efforts, the Vision is not human. Now from here, Tom King kind of takes us on a bit of a montage, so to speak, about how the Vision family begin to integrate themselves into the neighborhood since they've just arrived and people are getting used to who they are. But he also does a bit of a refresher for those of you guys who are new to Vision, maybe from the movies or simply because you just stumbled across this in a store and wanted to read it, and you don't know the full Vision, or I guess the full capabilities of Vision. What we know is that Vision's able to move through solid objects, he has super strength, he can enhance the density of his body, he can fly, all that kind of cool stuff. Basically everything you saw in the Avengers Age of Ultron movie with regards to Vision himself, minus the Mind Stone, which is something that he actually does not have in the comics. But the fact remains here that he's passed these abilities on to his children. They can all do the exact same thing as him. More so than that, the children are related to in a way that you would expect to see with kids who have powers, in the sense that, the daughter shows off her ability to phase through objects, Vision's son shows off his super strength to lift objects, and it's done very much to the enjoyment of the other children in the neighborhood. But for Vision himself and his wife, they don't really approve of this. The reason being because if they're trying to live a normal life, kids don't usually go around, or at least they shouldn't go around and show off their powers, at least in the mind of Vision. But this is where Vision doesn't understand what it means to be human. Because if I had powers, and if I were 11 years old, I'd show them off to the world. If I were 11 years old and I had the ability to fly, I would not walk anywhere. I'd fly everywhere. My parents would get angry, they would tell me to stop, but I wouldn't really care. And more so than that, Vision again has kind of abandoned his traditional role of being a superhero and instead is really more of a liaison to the White House. Now, he's not really paid here, and in fact, this is something that Tom King talks about. Because of the fact that the Avengers are not on a paying basis anymore, that is to say, they're not bankrolled by Tony Stark. Because of this, they're more or less in a situation where they're operating pro bono. They're operating for free. They're just fighting and saving the world because that's just what you do when you're an Avenger. It's your responsibility as a superhero. So they're really basing their actions off moral servitude as opposed to the fact that they get paid. And so because of this, Vision is effectively running low on money. But what he also tells us is that his family spends their time dealing with life in their own individual ways. And this is something that I'd like you to take note of, because Vision's wife sits at home pondering, going through her own memories, because these memories have been artificially implanted in her mind by Vision. And so a lot of the things that she knows, a lot of the things that she's learning, she's experiencing for the very first time. And so because of that, some of the memories make her cry, some of the memories make her happy, but at the same time, his kids also spend their time analyzing almost all the information that's out there in the world. Now again, this is Tom King kind of continuing this trend of depicting the Visions as fish out of water, so to speak, in the sense that the kids go to school, the kids experience life in school, the Vision goes on missions for the Avengers, he operates continually as this liaison for the White House. But because of the fact that Vision's children are not human, because of the fact that they have powers and they seem a little out of place, Tom King draws on this in saying that they are basically abnormal. Now, the reason why this works and the reason why it's effective is because it's essentially Tom King giving us a scenario of everyday life for children everywhere. And what I mean here is a lot of you guys have probably experienced in your younger days, assuming that you're not still in school, or if you currently are in school, you've experienced that circumstance where you simply just feel out of place. It doesn't mean that you're picked on, but it does mean that, for whatever reason, you just don't seem to fit in, or maybe there's a certain crowd that you want to fit into that you don't seem to fit in. And this is what he's doing with Vision's children. He's basically saying that by virtue of their powers, because they can fly, because their physical appearance is different, they have children asking them questions like, are you normal? So on and so forth. And one of the cool things is, again, this is a very much a learning experience for Vision's children. And the son goes as far as to ask his sister, am I normal? And this is not a question that they can simply just answer on their own. This is a very relative question. This is a question that's really contextual based on the situation. A person who can fly is not normal to a person that cannot fly, but a person that cannot fly is abnormal to a person who can fly. And so this is all just relative based on the individual who's observing the situation. Now from here, we pick up with Vision himself. And what Tom King tells us is that Vision's family doesn't actually sleep per se. They kind of shut down, but they don't really sleep like we do. Like when we sleep, our body basically recuperates from the day. If you're working out, if you're lifting weights, your body's recuperating and building muscle during that time. If you're sitting at home all day doing nothing, well then your body's just kind of resting from whatever it is that you did. But the fact remains here that for Vision, they basically shut down, and it allows him to absorb information or to go over the day's information, everything they learned, to get rid of what's not relevant and to keep what is relevant. But for Vision, he suddenly wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning one day, and it's very weird for him because he has a lot of fear over the family that he's created. Now, the reason why Vision has this, and this is really a testament to the fact that he's continually moving towards being human, the reason why Vision has this fear is because he's in uncharted waters. He's never created a family for himself, and there's a lot of inexperience here, basically. He doesn't know what direction things are going to take. For all the programming that they have, Vision is testament to the fact that programming can evolve, that programming can change. And then the question is, will their programming change? Will their programming evolve? This becomes prevalent in the fact that while Vision's wife and children are basically sitting at the table, and Vision's wife is going over all the different things that are happening with regards to their schoolwork, whether or not they're understanding it, so on and so forth, that his daughter Viv simply freaks out once the mother Virginia basically says, you made a mistake here, or you got something wrong. And this is basically just teens lashing out for any number of reasons. And in truth, this is just teenage angst. This is just how teenagers are. When I was a teenager, I would get upset over the smallest things because it just felt like, well, my parents are attacking me because they don't understand me, and teenagers get angry for a multitude of reasons. But the fact remains here that as she begins to storm off, she's suddenly stabbed through the abdomen by a blade. Now, the person who's wielding this blade is actually a guy named the Grim Reaper. Now, the Grim Reaper is a very low-level villain. He's really no one to concern yourselves with at all, except for the fact that he's here because all the different neighbors were taking pictures with Vision. Now, they know who he is as a member of the Avengers, which is one of the reasons why he drew so much attention when he arrived here. But the fact remains that, for Grim Reaper, he hates Vision. He's angry at him at the fact that Vision basically represents, his dead brother Simon Williams, or at least perceived dead brother Simon Williams. More so than that, in the mind of Grim Reaper, Vision's trying to take Simon Williams' place, and so he simply calls them imposters. He says his family are fake, they're not real, that they're all imposters, that all of them need to be destroyed because they're effectively abominations. Now, in response to this, Vision's wife Virginia attacks Grim Reaper from behind and beats him to death. And this is something that I'd really like you to pay attention to, and the reason for this is because when Vision gets home and when everything is explained to him by his wife, what she does is she actually lies here. Now, this again is an example of how programming can change and evolve. By your very definition, because she's really just a series of numbers, zeros and ones, she's programming language, it would be expected that she could not lie, but she is. Her programming is evolving to the point where she's continually becoming human, and she's starting to lie here, and she basically makes up an entire situation. She blends lies with truth. And this is why I say she's really changing, because most everybody knows that the secret to a good lie is blending truth in, is making it impossible for people to know what's really true and what's really a lie. If you merge them together, then they're intertwined. It's almost impossible to know what it is that's actually true here. And so because of this, she says, yes, he showed up to the house, and yes, he began calling us imposters, but the lie comes into play when she says, she was incapacitated, he moved towards her son, and she attacked him, and he fled from the conflict. Now, because of the fact that he was dead, we know that she had to do something with him. More so than that, the question is, what did she do? Now, Vision himself doesn't seem to have any reason to believe that she's lying, but the fact remains here that at the very least, there's some indication that she might be. Now, because of the fact that Vivian was injured so extensively, she's basically been taken away and she's going to be undergoing repairs. And so Vin is essentially left at school by himself, and he's kind of pondering his own existence. He's really going through an existential crisis here. And one of the funny things is that, you know, he recalls a conversation he had with Viv where they had talked about the idea of what differentiates humans from non-humans. I guess the case that Vin was making here was that, you know, humans, or I guess they, you know, as androids and humans, are completely different simply because of the fact that, you know, Vision's family, they don't need to eat, they don't really need to sleep, they can function 24/7. Because of the fact that they have powers, they are effectively invulnerable in comparison to a normal human being. That is to say, a normal human being couldn't punch them and actually inflict harm. You know, these things make them wildly different. Now, while he's pondering himself, he's approached by another student, and the student basically says that Viv had class with him, that he basically needs to get a hold of her, presumably for help with some homework or for an assignment that the two of them had. But he begins to get very angry at the fact that that Vin will not respond to him. And so he says, well, you know, what's your problem? He says, you know, maybe I should send a message and basically shove it up your, you know, your rear end. And in response, Vin lashes out and begins to choke this student. Now, again, he starts to ponder on what it is that Vivian said, and he recalls when she said that within the human brain, within the neck, there's effectively an artery, and that if this artery is squeezed, the heart will stop sending blood to the brain under the belief that too much blood is going to the brain, and so it'll effectively shut the brain down. Now, that's assuming that it's squeezed for some, you know, length of time. In the case here, Vin is basically just squeezing it to the point that this kid just passes out. But the fact remains that because of this, Vin is starting to express anger, he's starting to express rage, emotions that should not be present in him as an organism. And so what happens is, of course, he's called before the school principal by a man named Mr. Maxwell. Now, with Vision and Virginia sitting here, one of the funny things is that they seem to be very detached, of course, because they are robots, or at the very least, Virginia's acting as a robot. But the principal's getting very angry here, and he has a bias when he basically says, you're not human. You guys are effectively weapons. You bring children into the school who could easily kill any number of the students here. They are weapons, and they should be removed from the school because they're tantamount to having a gun. But Vision says, no, that's ridiculous. They're going to stay here because they're students. More so than that, I've saved your life on 37 different times, whether you know it or not, by virtue of being an Avenger, being part of Avengers West Coast, and fighting various villains. He's like, so every single breath you take, every time you get up in the morning, every piece of food that you eat, it's simply because of the fact that I made it possible. You know, you are alive because I allow it. And so Vision effectively walks out, and there's really no other argument here. He says that his child will undergo the discipline that this particular instance warrants, which is to say to be suspended from school, and they're going to call it a day. And this is really cool because I imagine a lot of you guys out there who are parents have probably experienced a scenario with a principal that's full of themselves. It takes a lot more liberty with their power than their position warrants. And I imagine you've envisioned a lot of scenarios where you put that principal in their place. And so hopefully this goes towards you being able to experience, you know, that kind of thing, you know, by way of Vision himself. But the fact remains here that, you know, while Vision goes inside, you know, once they return home, Vision goes inside to basically check up on the children, to check up on his daughter, who he senses is able to undergo repairs at this point in time. And when Virginia goes to check the mail, she realizes there's a box with a phone in it, and it says to press play. And when she presses the play button, it is basically a video of her burying the body of the Grim Reaper, of Simon Williams' brother. And so she receives an incoming call, and she effectively ignores it, indicating that someone saw what she did, and presumably that person is going to blackmail her. Now from here, we end up switching back to their home later on that night, or presumably a few nights later, with a couple kids who begin going through and spray painting graffiti on their home. Now again, this is basically just Tom King showing us that not everybody in this neighborhood's glad to see them, that a lot of people in this neighborhood consider them to be outliers. But what also happens here is Virginia reaches in and yanks them into the wall. Now this is again Tom King basically telling us that she's starting to express more murderous tendencies. She's starting to become darker and darker of a human being, or as close to a human being as she can get. And this is one of the things that I really like about this, because it shows us that the Vision was trying to create a family, but despite his intelligence, despite the fact that he's a robot, he knows almost every single calculation, there are some things that he just cannot predict, which is to say the prediction of evolution. Now from here, we pick up with a segment that seems to come out of left field. And so, you know, bear with me for a second because it seems kind of weird. But what Tom King does is he draws our attention to a plant called the Everbloom Blossom. And this plant comes from Wundagore Mountain. Now what he tells us is that this plant was given to Scarlet Witch by way of Agatha Harkness. Now Agatha Harkness is a legitimate witch within Marvel Comics. And what I mean by that is Scarlet Witch basically can manipulate reality depending on what era of comics you're reading. Sometimes it's chaos magic, sometimes it's just whatever it is, it's her powers, she's involved in magic. Her abilities are kind of murky. There's never really been a definitive set
power. Even within the comics themselves, when people said that she can control chaos magic, Doctor Strange said, no, chaos magic does not exist, and I know everything about magic. But of course, according to Senior Magico from the Luke Cage comics, Doctor Strange doesn't know everything about magic. So the fact remains here that Agatha Harkness is a legitimate witch. She practices witchcraft, but she was also a tutor for Scarlet Witch. She really taught Scarlet Witch a lot of the things that she knows, which is one of the reasons why we can point to Wanda Maximoff being a legitimate witch. But the fact remains that in order for people to effectively use this tree, the rumor is if they consume it the right way, they can see the future. But if they consume it the wrong way, it'll kill them. And so what this does is this transitions to Agatha Harkness herself. And what Tom King does is kind of take us on this journey, this really weird sort of situation where he talks about how people who would go to Wundagore Mountain or go to that area and take those plants, or at least believe they were taking those plants, were being subjected to being tricked. That various people would go to travel around the area, they would grab rose bushes and they would paint the leaves. And then tourists would show up and they would buy these leaves believing that they were actually the Everbloom blossom. And so they would go back to the airport on their way home, they would be curious, they would taste it, realize they had been tricked, and that would be the end of it. But because Agatha Harkness is a legitimate witch, she knows how to use it effectively. And so what we're told is that in order for this to actually be used, that the leaf has to be consumed twice. The first is that you have to consume it after hunger, and the second is you have to consume it after murder. And if this is done, then it will legitimately allow you to be able to see the future. And this is why I say Agatha Harkness is a witch, simply because of the fact that she doesn't possess the power to innately see the future. She can't warp reality in a traditional sense. She has to use different things to her advantage, very much, cloak and dagger, cauldrons, different things like that, very similar to our normal perception of a witch. And so what we do is we end up picking up with Vision again as he's basically bringing his daughter back. And what happens is he enlists the aid of Tony Stark because it's going to require a massive amount of power to do it, but also because Tony Stark's the best engineer in the Marvel Universe. And so if there were anybody suited to help, basically jumpstart the mind of the Vision's daughter, it would be Tony Stark. Now, Tony Stark is initially hesitant about this. He says, look, this could be very detrimental. This could result in taking down a huge amount of the power grid in North America, to say nothing of the fact that it could overload your brain and destroy you. But this is a testament to the fact that Vision truly believes these are his kids, because he's willing to sacrifice his life to make sure that his daughter comes back. And so he says, I do not care if it ends up killing me. My daughter needs to be brought back. She's my daughter and I will save her. And so what we do is we basically jump back once again to Agatha Harkness after Vision's daughter is restored. And Agatha successfully ends up transforming one of her cats into an actual panther, and then she kills the panther. And after doing this, she basically consumes the leaf. And after consuming the leaf, she begins to have this vision where she starts to realize that Vision himself is surrounded in blood, that the Avengers are dead, presumably that Vision is going to lay waste to the entirety of the superhero landscape in the Marvel Universe. This is one of the reasons why this is so cool, because when it comes to characters being able to see the future, Marvel has largely gambled on Ulysses of the Inhumans. In fact, that's really been the crux of their tie-ins with Civil War II. Ulysses sees the future, he tells the Avengers, Carol Danvers' team shows up, and then we get a fight between Carol Danvers and Iron Man yet again. And so with Tom King here, he's not taking this road. He's saying that Agatha Harkness sees the future is going to lead to the destruction of the Avengers. And so it seems very, very much as though this particular conflict, what's going on in this Vision story, is taking place outside of the events of Civil War II, which I am not at all upset about. And so again, what we end up doing is that we end up with a really funny situation here with the family kind of continuing along, or the family dynamic, the human aspect of Vision and his family following this path, in the sense that because of the fact that, Vision and his wife are alone, his wife begins to make romantic gestures towards him. And so it seems as though the two of them are going to be intimate with one another. Now again, this is Tom King telling us that they are very much trying to be human, even though they really aren't. And so what happens here is we basically pick up with the continuation of this as we jump into Virginia, the wife of Vision, finally answering the phone after so many rings. And so what happens is that while this is taking place, Vision's children also return to school. And again, they're all being subjected to ridicule. And this is one of the things that I hope you notice, is that this rejection of Vision and his family, the darker tones that their family's starting to take, the perceptions they have, and considering themselves outliers, continue to expand, and they continue to widen even further every single time. And so what we end up doing is we join Virginia as she contacts her husband while he's being fighting alongside the Avengers. Now, the idea is he needs to come back home, and he says, well, maybe Nova can take his place, but it'll it'll take some time in order for that to be secured. And so while he's gone, she travels to the residence of the person who called her. And when she gets there, it's a man who says that he was curious about who they were, about who the Visions were. He had traveled to their home with the intention of meeting them. But when he arrived, nobody answered with a knock on the door. And when he went around back to see whether or not he could get their attention then, that it resulted in him realizing that she was burying a body, which he took footage of. Now, he comes to her saying that he didn't want to cause any major problems. That's why he contacted her, is because he wanted to make her aware of what it was that he had done. But while this argument between the two of them are taking place, his son begins to come downstairs. And when the father pulls out a gun and prepares to shoot Virginia, she allows herself to phase. The bullet passes through her and it results in the death of this man's son. And so in his anger, he starts to lash out, and in response, Virginia punches him and kills him with a single punch. And so again, she's really falling towards the realm of villainy. She's really becoming a very dark character here. And so what we end up doing is we end up following this situation to its most logical conclusion. Because of the fact that the boy's dead, it's obviously drawn the attention of the police. And when they arrive, a detective basically wants to question Vision away from his family and back at a police precinct. And this is why I say things are getting very strange, because while he's gone, his wife begins to realize everything that's taking place. His wife begins to realize that the cops seem to be catching on to her actions. Not only that, this perfect family dynamic is starting to go away. And so she starts lashing out and she tears up the table, but it also seems as though she begins wrecking everything around her. Now, transitioning back to Vision himself, Tom King gives us this very long monologue, this very long diatribe, which is interesting in and of itself, but the crux of this is that Vision begins, recalling all the times that he saved the world. During his first encounter with Ultron, once he joined the Avengers, his battles against Immortus, his battles against Thanos and his hordes, against, the forces of Namor the Submariner, when Atlantis attacked, against Loki, so on and so forth. But all of this is juxtaposed to the questions that are being asked to him by the detective, on where Vision was the night that this boy was murdered, on where Vision's family was, on what was going on, whether or not he keeps recordings of all the things that he does, so on and so forth. And Vision's basically telling us that of all the times, that he saved the world, all the times that he's been a legitimate superhero, that all of it's for nothing. And the reason why all of it's for nothing is because he was being a superhero for the right reasons. He was serving as a superhero, protecting the world for the right reasons. But now he's basically lying about the whereabouts of where his son was and where the rest of his family was when he says they were all with him. We know that wasn't the case, but he says they were. And so because of this, the Vision himself is beginning to come into this crisis where he's having to cover up for the fact that his family's doing some bad things. But it doesn't seem as though he knows what it is that his wife is doing here. And so at this point, we basically pick up with the conclusion of this story. And what happens is Vision comes to the belief that he would basically be able to fix his family if he were to expand it. And so because of the fact that the neighbor's dog gets out and begins sniffing around, that the neighbor's dog also begins digging, in the backyard and comes across the body of Grim Reaper. Now the dog bites the body of Grim Reaper, bites his sword, which sends out an electrical charge, and it ends up, or at least it seems to end up, killing the dog in the process. And so because of this, the neighbors come looking for their dog, and the family says, no, we don't really know where it is. But when they get inside the house is all ripped up. The house is completely torn to pieces. Now this is Tom King providing us with a metaphor. This is Tom King telling us that this disheveled nature of the house is reflective of the family dynamic. The house is in shambles. The house is torn to pieces. It doesn't look the way it did when it first started. When we first started the story, the house was beautiful. The house was well taken care of. It was very perfect, much like the Vision family. But at this point in the story, because of the fact that Virginia has been going down this path of villainy, because she's been committing these evil acts, because of the fact that her children don't really know where they stand within the realm of their place in society, because Vision is effectively absentee most of the time, the house has fallen into disarray, much like the Vision family. And so the question that's asked by this man is, have they seen his dog? And the answer is, of course, no, we haven't seen your dog. We don't know where it is. After which, we basically cut to Vision. And we find Vision removing this dog's brain for the purpose of placing this dog in the body of a computer, in the body of an android. And so he's basically given the family a pet. Now, Vision's hope here is that by virtue of having a pet in the house, it'll sort of bring the family together. It'll give them a cohesive unit, something to rally around. The problem is that Vision does not recognize what it is that's going on. Vision doesn't recognize that the reason why the family's gone to pieces isn't because they don't have some one thing they can rally around. It's because their programming is evolving, because the wife's programming is evolving or lending her towards being a villain. You know, the programming of his children are lending them towards trying to figure out who they are. Now, we will find out later on what it is that's going on with his wife's brain patterns, but that section is actually not covered in this story arc. But as we do wrap up this story arc, what we do is we basically join Agatha Harkness as she's created an illusion for the Avengers. And this entire segment that we've been hearing, this inner monologue that's been given to us, has been coming from Agatha Harkness. And so she's basically been telling the Avengers everything that's been going on with the Vision. And she says the Vision will do whatever it takes to protect his family, even if that means killing off every single member of the Avengers. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I really hope you guys are getting a kick out of the Vision solo story, because in truth, I didn't really pay much attention to it, but Sal kept swearing by it. Sal over at Comic Pop kept saying, it's one of the best stories you're ever going to read. You gotta sit down and read it. And I did, and I've absolutely loved it. But if you guys are new here to the Rob Corps, make sure you guys drop a like, make sure you guys hit the sub button, become part of the Rob Corps, and yeah, post a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this, and I will catch you all later. Peace.